license management. My name is Dominic Haig of Agilist Software, and I'll be carrying us through today's webinar and demonstration. So let me go straight on to look at our agenda. First of all, we'll do a quick overview of Agilist. Then we'll talk about some of your options for internet-based license management and go into detail on some of those, which are product activation, floating licensing, and the automation of legacy key-based licensing systems. We'll then do a demonstration, and then at the end, we'll take your questions. Do feel free to enter questions at any time. First of all, a little bit about Agilist Software. So we're a 7-year-old company based in Northern California, and our exclusive focus is on license management. That's what we do. And one of the things that we bring to the market is that we were able to start 7 years ago with a clean sheet approach to software licensing. So we developed our solutions in a world in which you have the internet and you have wide area networks and VPNs and firewalls and so forth, but a world in which network connectivity cannot be assumed, unlike the old days of fairly reliable local area networks. So a system might have a momentary network connection, no network connection, and so forth. We use selected standards where appropriate, and along with many other things, as I hope you'll see as we go through today, we focus on ease of use for you as our direct customer and ease of use for the end user of the applications protected with our solution. So over the past several years, we've acquired several hundred customers around the world in a whole range of businesses, companies and institutions such as the U.S. Navy, Fair Isaac, Harris, Lockheed Martin, and so forth. And while we don't always know where the applications are going which are being protected by our solutions, we do know that there are Agilist protected applications working in some quite demanding end customer environments, demanding in terms of network access and so forth and security. And places such as the U.S. National Security Agency, the South Korean and Israeli defense organizations, inside big banks such as Bloomberg, ING, Nomura, and so forth. We offer 4 solutions. First of all, our Easy Licenser License Manager, which is suitable for standalone desktop applications, multi-thread server applications. And when it comes to network licensing, if you want to have a license server in the architecture for supporting floating licensing or product activation, that's where we'd recommend our Orion Network Licensing Platform, which we call a platform because it covers a range of licensing scenarios, whether from an internet-hosted license server or from an Orion license server installed on your end customer's network. And then to support internet-based licensing, we also offer our Acropolis managed service. So you always have the option as an Orion customer of hosting the Orion server in your own data center. If you don't want to do that, then we provide an on-demand managed service out of a Tier 1 data center that we could have that up and running for you as quickly as this afternoon, have a service set up for you. We also offer our Acropolis Integration Manager, or AIM, and AIM is about how do you automate the license lifecycle, the generation and issuing of licenses, delivering those licenses to the customers, updating those licenses, tracking what licenses you've issued, and so forth. So let's talk through some of your internet-based licensing options. First of all, and the term we're going to use here is product activation. So this is where you're typically issuing a single license or a small group of licenses, and where an activation event is required for the application to be used. So the license is activated, and then after it's first activated, it then typically carries on working on that machine with no further communication required with the license server, and is locked to the machine on which it was activated, so it can't just be copied to any other system. Another term we use is internet-based enterprise licensing, and by that we mean a pool of licenses being managed, again, by a hosted license server. So an example of this would be, say, an institution or a large enterprise buys maybe 25 or 50 or 100 licenses, but rather than having those set up as individually tracked licenses, there is a pool, say, of those 50 licenses, and one ID is used to activate every one of those. So your customer system administrator would just send out that one ID to all the authorized users. They'll activate their license, and the hosted server is going to enforce that count of 50 licenses or 25 licenses or whatever it might be, and ensure that not more than that number are ever activated. Another option is internet-based floating licensing. You're probably familiar with the idea of floating licensing over your end customer's network, but with Orion we can also offer floating licensing over the internet from a hosted server. And this has some advantages for you and also for your customer, and we'll come to those. And then there is the automation of legacy key-based licensing systems, really a different kind of option. But this is where a lot of companies have legacy key-based systems, either third-party or systems they developed themselves quite some time ago. They don't necessarily want to upgrade those applications to a modern licensing system all at one go, but would like to automate that process of delivering keys for those systems, perhaps have a single portal for managing both the old and new licensing systems. And that's what's offered by our AIM service. And then finally, the other option that using the internet allows you is for allowing both your channel partners, resellers, distributors, OEM partners, and so forth, and your enterprise customers to manage their own licenses within the limits that you've set up. So you can allow resellers to configure the licenses as they take orders, your enterprise customers to manage a pool of licenses, for example, that they've purchased from you. So you can delegate the administration, but you still know what's happening, what your resellers are doing, which licenses they've issued, and so forth. Okay, let's move in and talk about product activation specifically. And I'd start by just looking at the typical kind of setup. So let's assume for the moment that there is a network and internet connection from the licensed system. So it's a desktop application or a server application connected to the internet. There's an Orion server either hosted on your premises as the software vendor or by Agilys as part of our Acropolis service. And then you or your reseller are setting up licenses either from a web browser or automatically out of your back office system. So let's just walk through the typical flow. Here that you receive an order, so you set up the license in the hosted Orion server under some unique product serial number. And that product serial number is not a key, it's just a unique identifier for that user's license. And you can specify that to be whatever you want. What you then need to do is send your user an email perhaps with their instructions as to how to download the software and telling them what their product serial number is. And they then go ahead and install your application using whatever your normal installation process might be. And there's then an activation event required to enable the software to work. So the user is prompted to enter their product serial number. They do so, and what the licensing software does is it connects to the Orion server to check that the license is available and that it hasn't previously been activated on another system, and also reads from the license server what the license limits are that apply to that particular license. It also, at the same time, reads from the system it's running on what the locking parameters are, for example, the MAC address or host ID or CPU ID or whatever it might be. And it takes those locking parameters and the product serial number and the license limits, and those are all encrypted in a file we call the activation record, which is kept locally on that target machine. So each time after that the application runs, it performs the license check and interrogates that local activation record to obtain its license limits and to check it's running on the correct machine. So what are some of the benefits of product activation for you as a software vendor? First of all, obviously it's automatic. There are no keys for you to distribute. It's secure. The node locking is automatic, so there's no possibility for error there of your operators or your customers mistyping MAC addresses, for example. And you can lock to any particular parameters you want. And Orion also offers fuzzy fingerprinting, which is a way of providing some resiliency against minor system changes and not requiring the license to be reactivated if, say, the user changes out their Ethernet card, for example. It also supports secure licensing via resellers and OEM partners, and we discussed that, and also allows you to manage your maintenance and support subscriptions. So you could be tracking your customers' maintenance and support status. So, for example, your application installer or your support people could know whether a customer is current on maintenance and support, so would know whether to install a new upgrade, whether to provide premium support, and so forth. In terms of operations cost, this is obviously it's automatic. There's no operations involved in activating the license, even on disconnected systems, and we'll come to that. And Orion does support user self-service license relocation as a first-class operation. So you control whether a given user or a group of users is allowed to relocate their license and how often they can do so. And to relocate a license, the user just deactivates the license on the first machine, goes over to another system where that software is installed and can activate it on that second machine. So there's no operation support for you to do, but you track each such license relocation in the Orion server, and the Orion server is going to ensure there's only one instance of a given user's license active at any one time. And you can delegate license administration both to your resellers, the channel partners, and your end users. If, say, you have an enterprise customer who has those 25 licenses, you can delegate administration to their system administrator, so that system administrator can assign licenses, see who has licenses, run reports, and so forth. In terms of flexibility, then for each user or group of users, you control how their different features in your modules in your product are enabled, any time limits or usage limits. You also, as I'll show you later in the demonstration, it's easy to apply license upgrades. It just requires a reactivation of the license once the new limit is set in the server. And it also allows you to issue revocable licenses. So this is where the license is set up so that it has to be periodically revalidated against the license server for it to continue operating. So at any point, you can go into the license server, cancel that license, and that user's license will soon thereafter cease to operate. You can also upload and download data at activation time. So, for example, you could be downloading information to your application about new versions or special promotions, or you could be capturing data from the user about their industry, their requirements, and so forth. And as I mentioned, it's the same solution, the same server if you want to also offer floating licensing, be that over the internet or over your own customer's network. And finally, in terms of business intelligence, then all licensing activity, license limits, and so forth are all captured in the Orion server. There's a built-in report generator. You could be running reports either online or invoking them from an external system. And you have the ability, as I mentioned, to capture data at activation time about the user, the systems on which the licenses are activated, and so on. So if your end customers, the benefit to your end customers, obviously activation is immediate. It's 24/7. They don't need to send you any information about the machine on which they want to run the license from you. They can relocate licenses and so forth as you allow them to do so. They can immediately access upgrades. They don't need to manage keys. In terms of convenience, one feature I'll highlight is the user briefcase. I mentioned it down here. So during license relocation, there's a user briefcase function in Orion, so you can automatically via Orion, for example, transfer user settings from the system on which your license is being deactivated to the new system on which it's now being activated. So as far as the user is concerned, they've set up your application as they want to use it. They deactivate it, go and start it up and activate it on another system. And when they activate that second system, it then comes up in the same state as they left it on the first system. They don't need to re-enter all those user settings. Okay, so that's great if you have a network connection. What if you don't have a network connection? So here we have the same setup, except this time it's a disconnected machine. And this approach we call SneakerNet. And so what happens here, the same thing, the users receive their product serial number, the license has been set up, the software tries to activate, and it finds that it can't communicate with the license server. So the licensing software takes that node locking information and the product serial number and encrypts it in a file we call the fingerprint file. The user is instructed to carry that file on some transportable medium, a thumb drive, flash drive, whatever it might be, to any web terminal and to upload it there at the self-service web page for the hosted Orion server. The Orion server then generates their activation record as an encrypted file that's straight away returned to the user, and they walk that back over and place it on their target machine. So you end up with the same outcome as for a connected machine. It's fully automatic as far as you're concerned. The license is activated within the limits you specified in the server, and the users can do that anytime they want, 24/7 worldwide. And an obvious extension of this is that the user could also email that fingerprint file to your operations people, who then create the activation record and mail it back. But generally, our customers find that if their users have access to email, they also have access to a web browser, so can just use the self-service mechanism. Another scenario that's often encountered in the finance and defense and some of the higher security industries, verticals, is where the internal systems are isolated behind a firewall or perhaps with no external access at all. And there are a couple of options there for you. The first is that the Orion client does have direct support for HTTP proxy servers. So if there's an appropriate HTTP proxy server available on that customer's DMZ, then they can do automatic activation and deactivation and relocation of licenses from those internal systems, just as though they're on the internet. If there isn't an appropriate proxy server, then a part of the Orion package is the Orion License Proxy Server. So you can install that on a DMZ machine and so offer automatic activation and relocation and so forth of licenses from those internal machines, just as though they're on the internet. Okay, so that's product activation. Let's move on now and talk about if you have a larger group of customers. That is, instead of somebody just buying one license, let's say you have an enterprise that bought that 25 or 50 licenses. And another option supported by Orion is the idea of an enterprise pool where somebody might have 25 licenses, but there isn't a one-to-one association of each license with a specific product serial number. It might be just one ID for the whole pool, that each user who wants to activate a license within that pool just needs to enter that ID. So they can still go support all the standard things we've been talking about, offline activation and deactivation, and the licensing parameters are specified at the pool level. So those are the limits that will take effect each time a license out of that pool is activated. And though we call this anonymous user licensing, you can nevertheless have a username that can be associated with each license so that yourself or the system administrator can see who's checked out which license. And this license pool, it can be, we've been describing on a hosted Orion server. It could also be on a redistributed Orion server installed on your end customer's network, in which case they would just need one such server for their entire global network. And the enterprise pool does also support, if your customer wants it, the idea of having each license associated with a specific product serial number if they wish to track it that way. So you can offer either option to your enterprise customers. Okay, let's move on and talk about floating licensing. So here's typical floating licensing setup. And what's new here is what we're introducing with Orion is the idea that the Orion license server can be hosted on your end customer's network, in which case just one server is needed for the entire global network, or on the internet. So you can offer floating licensing for your end customers from a hosted license server. And you can mix and match as your customers prefer. So you could be offering internet-hosted floating licensing to some customers and floating licensing from a redistributed license server to other customers. And in this scenario, then Orion supports both a named user and anonymous user licensing. Also supports secure commuter licensing, where a license, for example, could be checked out onto a laptop and when that machine is taken off the network for 2 weeks, for example, and during those 2 weeks, that license is securely locked in that machine. It's not available to anybody else, and the license server knows that that license has been checked out and won't allow anybody else to check out that license. Okay, so some of the Orion's floating licensing capabilities, as I said, are hosted on the internet or by you or by Agilys. And the license pools can be named user, where there's a specific name associated with each license, and it's typically dedicated to each license dedicated to an individual, or an anonymous user, which is more like the classic concurrent licensing, where any authorized user can check out a license from a pool. Some of the advantages of offering internet-based floating licensing rather than redistributing the server. So first of all, for your customers, there's no license server for them to manage. Also, you as the vendor, you have access to all of their licensing activity data. So you can see what they're using. You can see how, for example, if they're approaching a user count limit, so you should go and sell them further licenses and so forth. You only need one server for managing all this hosted licensing that we've been talking about. And for each pool, you set the limits for that pool individually. So you can control, for example, for each enterprise, how many licenses they have, how different features are configured, any time limit, licensing limits, and so forth. What this also means is that since you control the license server, that the licenses are revocable by you. That if for some reason you need to revoke a user's license, or reduce their license count, or install an upgrade. So if you want to add licenses and so forth, there's nothing for the end customer to do, that you can do all that for them. As I mentioned, only one server are needed for all of your customers. And you can define all these different kinds of limits, not just licensing limits, but also things such as what's the minimum period for which a license can be checked out, what's the maximum period for which a license can be checked out, and so forth. And you can provide that admin and reporting capability to your end customers, provide them with a login so they can log into their license pool, they can manage their licenses, they can see who's got licenses checked out, they can run reports, and so forth, and further constrain the license limits. In fact, for individual licenses, within the overall limits that you specified for that license pool. And for any customers who don't want to do that, then you can just redistribute the Orion license server. It's the same executable as you would be providing for the hosted licensing scenario. And they'd only need one license server for the entire global network. That, unlike older systems where you had to have a license server per local area network, with Orion they would just need one server for their entire global wide area network. And this commuter licensing is secure. There are no security holes there. And as I mentioned, you can check out licenses onto disconnected systems. You can take for example, checking out a license via SneakerNet to take it off on the road for 2 weeks, things such as that. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about internet-hosted floating licensing, because the floating licensing historically has meant the basic requirements that when somebody wants a license, that the acquisition and so on are transparent to that user. It's automatic. They just fire up the application. And they don't need to explicitly activate or request a license. That if it's available, it's acquired when they start up the application, and it's automatically released when they exit that application. Now, some of the older floating licensing systems, then they have a particular approach, which is detailed here, which is that there is a checkout done at startup, and the license is released at the exit. However, the application and the license server do have this continuous communication going on, that all the time that the application is there and being used, it's talking to the license server. And that type of heartbeat communication, first of all, it doesn't really suit environments with firewalls and perhaps with unreliable networks. And it does require that the license server have access and the application have continuous access to each other all the time that the application is running. So obviously, in terms of availability and scalability to large numbers of users, there are issues there. There are issues with security. This is a very easy system to cheat on, in effect. And it really isn't suited for an internet environment or for a wide area network type environment. So what we've done with Orion is a quite different approach. That Orion uses a duration-based checkout. There's no concept of a heartbeat with Orion. So when the application does a checkout, it obtains its license, and it requests a license that it have that license for a particular period, which could be hours or days, weeks, months, or in perpetuity. And while it has that license during that checkout period, there's no further communication required with the license server, and the checkout state is kept in a local encrypted activation record. And you as the vendor, you control the limits on what's the minimum checkout duration, maximum checkout duration, and so forth. So during that period, during a checkout, there's no requirement for the application to be talking to the server. There's no need for the network connection to be there, for the server to be up and running, and so forth. The license server does keep track of which checkouts have been done in a license database. So, for example, at the end of a checkout period, there's no need for the application to explicitly return that license. It will just, the license will cease running, and the license server, without communicating with that licensed application, will automatically reclaim that license and make it available to somebody else. It is built on a HTTP protocol, so it's compatible with the internet and works just fine over wide area networks, VPNs, and so forth. So you are able to have, in the end, a scalable, highly available floating licensing system without having to redistribute the server to your end customers. And you do have those enterprise pool level access control mechanisms, so you can provide that. Any number of enterprises, different customers, can have those license pools managed by the one Orion server. Okay, let's now move on and talk about AIM, or the Acropolis Integration Manager. So if you recall, this was for managing the license lifecycle. So AIM, it's an on-demand service. Its purpose is to automate the license management lifecycle. So the generation of licenses, of getting those licenses to customers, of managing updates, and providing reporting and auditing and so on of all the licenses that have been issued. And this is a hosted managed service, which is designed to be rapidly configurable. So as new customers start using, new software vendors start using AIM, as you add new products into your mix of products with AIM, then that can be rapidly set up. So why would you use this? obviously for eliminating infrastructure and operations costs for you and for your end customers, that you have a hosted service that takes care of all of this for you. And another key benefit of AIM is for software vendors who have more than one licensing system. Because as you'll see with AIM, you can be managing many different underlying licensing systems within the one management system. So what AIM does is to abstract out above the level of what the particular licensing system is. So as far, for example, as your operations people are concerned, they're just going in and calling up a license for a particular product, and it doesn't matter to them what the underlying licensing technology is, be that Orion or Easy Licenser from Agilys or your legacy system or whatever it might be. As it is rapidly configurable, you can rapidly introduce new models and products into your AIM system, and it provides a smoother experience for your end users, as you'll see through the automation that AIM provides for you, of delivery and fulfillment. So let's look at the system topology, typical system topology for AIM, in this case for an activation scenario. So on your side as the software vendor, as the independent software vendor, the ISV, or your reseller, that you'll be accessing AIM either from a web browser and logging into your web portal, or automatically have your back office system via web services. So here's the AIM system, which is built around an Orion server that's managing the licenses for you. And there's a database tracking all the licenses and the email server for communication out to your end customer. And then over here at your end customer, there'll be your application, which is that's the application that's going to be activated. And as we described, then the activation can either happen directly by communication over the internet. It can be happening via a web browser for that SneakerNet offline activation we mentioned. And there's also an email that will be sent automatically by AIM out to the customer, telling them about their license and how to obtain their license and what their product serial number is, for example, as we'll show you in the demonstration. So that's a typical AIM topology where you have for product activation. Now, when you have a legacy key scenario, it's a little different. So in this case, what we've added in here, we have the same setup here, either from a web browser or from the back office system to be accessing AIM. But there's now also here within AIM that the key generator is plugged into AIM for generating those keys for whatever that system might be. And then a little different process over here on the customer side, that you set up the order in AIM. AIM will automatically send the email notification out to the customer. They receive their email, and they then click on a link in that email. And so from their web browser, they can go to the key retrieval web page that's set up by AIM, download that legacy key that's been generated for them by AIM, and then carry that over to their application. Now, a key capability of AIM in the legacy key scenario is that this key generation that's done by AIM is not done that actual generation of the key is not done until the point at which the user goes to retrieve it here from the self-service web page. So on that self-service web page, you can be requesting further information from the customer, such as, for example, the locking parameters from the machine on which they wish to install your application. And so they'll enter those locking parameters, and the key is generated on the fly for them, incorporating those locking parameters, and then returned to them so they can carry it over to their target system. So there's no need at the time of placing the order for the customer to communicate those locking parameters to you as the software vendor. That's all taken care of by AIM. Okay, so let's walk through some of the key capabilities of AIM. First of all, it does, as I said, abstract out. So you're dealing in terms of your customers and license agreements and product part numbers and so forth, or enterprise license pools. You're not having to worry about what are the underlying licensing technologies. It is all set up with a multi-user authorization model, so you could have different accounts for your operations people. For your resellers, for example, could be provided with a login to AIM for managing a pool of licenses that you've set up for them. As I mentioned, it supports any number of different underlying licensing systems. So you can have one web portal or one interface out to your back office and be setting up licenses under a number of different underlying licensing systems. It is designed for quick configuration, so you can brand the web page, so to your resellers and users it looks like has your look and feel, and it's very quick to bring up add in new products, new templates for the emails that are being sent out to your end customers to notify them that their licenses are available and how to obtain them. And there are a number of capabilities built into AIM for both your efficiency and have the best possible end user experience. So the email that gets sent out to each customer, you have the option to preview that, so you can personalize it, check it's exactly as you want it before you send it. If you have somebody who's bought a number of licenses, rather than them receiving a whole string of emails with one license per email, there's a batch mode, so they could receive one email with a notification for all 5 or 10 or whatever the number is for all of those licenses in just the one email. You can update licenses you've already issued, so let's say somebody buys a 1-year subscription license and then a year later renews it, you can update that license and have that new license limit take effect and that customer be notified. And you can also do what we call cloning, which is where, let's say you've already issued a license to a customer with features configured a particular way and so forth, and they order a second license. What you can do is identify, just find that first license and then clone it, make a copy of it, perhaps change things, update it as subscription period, for example, and then issue that license under a new product serial number. So that's more efficient and it reduces errors if you're issuing a number of licenses which are all similar. As you mentioned, if you have a customer who has that enterprise pool we described, then you can provide a self-service administration for your enterprise customers. They can be calling off licenses against a pool that they purchased from you. They don't need to go through you to do that. You don't need to set up all those, and you and they don't need to set up all those licenses ahead of time. They can call them off as they're needed. And as we mentioned, and as we'll show you, that when it comes to distributing actual license keys rather than the activation scenario, that there is the browser-based system for being able to download those keys and provide them directly to the end users. So that's the current version of AIM. There are some additional capabilities we'll be adding in the new version, which is in development right now. Excuse me. The first of which is a multi-level matrix authorization model that I highlight up here. So you can have for each entity, if you will, so for the software vendor, for your reseller, and so on, they can have a number of different roles. For example, so as a software vendor, you can go at the highest point to your administrator, down to guest. You can have operator, salesperson, and so forth, with different authorizations applied to each of them. And you'll be able to set up access control lists by user, by reseller, and so forth, so you can define who is allowed to see which product, which customers, and so on. The second thing we'll be doing with this new version is moving the configuration of things such as adding new products, the email templates, and your setup preferences, and so on, out to some self-service tools. So you won't even need to have Agilist do that for you. You'll be able to do that yourselves. And we'll also be providing a web services interface so that you'll be able to integrate AIM with your back office systems, your CRM systems, whatever it might be. And together with the ability to do data import in a number of different formats. If you have existing data on licenses and products and customers, you'll be able to import that or export it from AIM. Another capability we'll be adding will be multi-language support. So if you're serving customers in a number of different regions around the world, you'll be able to select what language, for example, you want that email to go to them in. So you could have email templates in English and French, German, Japanese, whatever it might be. And finally, we'll be adding in some improving various capabilities for managing large numbers of licenses, for the reporting, auditing, and so forth, and some tools for managing very large numbers of licenses, being able to set up packages and so forth. Now, specifically when it comes to managing licenses for legacy systems, then there are several advantages that AIM has in this area. First of all, a lot of legacy systems don't actually keep accurate track of what licenses have been issued to which customers, which products, with which license limits, and so forth. So now that AIM will track all of that, provide you with reporting tools, so you can see exactly what licenses have been generated and issued. As I'll show you, it automates license delivery. So it'll automatically send your standard email, which you can edit if you want. That your customer has a self-service page to go and pick up their key and so forth. And that's all entirely automated. So there's no electronic license delivery system required. That AIM takes care of all of that. For enterprises, we mentioned the pool and the batch capabilities. Those also apply. So you could be generating a batch of 10, 50, whatever it might be, of keys for providing those in one notification email to your customer system administrator. And as with the activation-based AIM licensing, then you also have the ability to offer self-service admin to your resellers, to your enterprise customers, and we'll be bringing in the web services interface as well for the integration with either your back office or your reseller's back office. And as we mentioned, two key points here is that it provides a single system if you have a number of different legacy licensing systems out there. It often happens with acquisitive software vendors who have been purchasing other companies, each of whom had their own licensing system that had been around for years. And I think the record is we encountered one customer that had over 80 different licensing systems within their company. So what AIM lets you do is to abstract that out so you can have one management and fulfillment system irrespective of what the underlying licensing technology might be. And then it's a non-disruptive path, so the licensed applications, the applications that are protected with the legacy system, don't need to be modified at all. You're just getting a key to them. What AIM is doing is smoothing out that generation and delivery of the keys to those existing applications. And then, of course, it is a ready upgrade path to the full Orion-based product activation as is convenient and as you're updating those applications. Okay, what I want to do now is move to a demonstration. I'll first go through, talk about how you use AIM for doing product activation, and then talk about how you use AIM for doing fulfillment for key-based systems. So let me go through to, there we are, to the log. So this is the login screen for AIM. And this is actually running out of a Tier 1 data center in Atlanta on the East Coast. This is where I'll be running our demonstration setup. And you can see here, I'm actually going to log into our demo account for an imaginary company called Acme. If I wanted to, this is where I was logging in as a reseller for Acme. This is where I would specify what my reseller login would be. So let me log in there. Now, what you see here are several panels, and they're managing different aspects of the license that we want to issue. So first of all, up here is the customer panel. So this is where, for example, I can pick an existing customer. Let's pick BigSoft. If I wanted to, as you see here, I could be entering a new customer and entering their contact information, address, and so forth. Let's go with that existing customer. The other thing you can do in AIM is an existing customer may have a number of different license agreements with you. So if you want to track the licenses generated on a particular license agreement, I could add a new agreement. In this case, let's pick an existing license agreement. So that's the customer we want to generate the license for. And then here we're going to select what's the product that we want to generate that license for, the type of licensing scenario we're doing. Now, we have listed here a number of different scenarios, trial licenses, the small business license, floating licensing, and so forth. Now, these could be all the same executable. What we're doing here is just different licensing scenarios, whether it's a product activation, internet-based floating licensing, redistributed floating licensing, and so forth. So to start with, let's pick the simple scenario. Let's pick a small business license, which is a simple product activation scenario. So I come down here to the user license panel. And the first thing I'll pick here will be the product serial number, that identifier that uniquely specifies a particular license. So there are three different things I can do here. If I leave it as it is, where it just says select, then AIM is going to automatically set up a product serial number, just a random string, and include that in the notification to the customer. I could also just type one in here if I want to use a particular product serial number that perhaps has come from my internal system. Or I can look up a previous, you can see here, there's some previous product serial numbers and the dates they were generated on. So I could just pick a previous product serial number like that, and then I could click here to enable cloning. I do that. Now what I've done is I've picked out what this previous product serial number was and the license parameters, and I could then change these parameters and generate a key that was like this one that had previously been generated. But what I'm going to do in this case is just I'm just going to go back to here and let AIM automatically generate the product serial number. So let me drop that. Okay. And cancel out of that. Sorry, there we go. That's what I want to do. So I'm going to let AIM do that. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is enter the license parameters. So for this product, there's things such as the license expiration date, technical support, bandwidth. These are just product parameters that we've imagined you want to set up for this product, Acme desktop. So we'll pick a license expiration date, pop up the calendar. Let's put it out. Put that out by a year. Bandwidth. And this could be just some parameter in the context of this application, and it could be a number. It could be I could be entering professional or basic or standard edition, whatever that might be. Let's say they purchased 1 year of technical support, and let's say they do want the productivity pack. Now, there are two other checkboxes currently that are currently checked on this screen. I'll talk about a couple of those. The first is, I said, I do want to notify the customer by email, and I do want to preview the email. That means when I click Generate License, as you'll see, it's going to pop up the email, let me look at that standard email template, modify it if I want, and send it on its way. The other thing I'm doing down here is I'm saying that this is the last key in the batch. So if I were to unclick that, I could go ahead and generate this license, and at that point, it won't send the email. It'll let me set up another license. And again, if I leave that unclicked, so it's not the last key in the batch, I can then go and set up a third license. And it's only when I tell IAM, okay, that was the last key, then it's going to generate that email and send the information for all those licenses all in one go. So that's how we support the batch processing. In this case, keep it simple. We're just doing the one key, so yep, it's the last key in the batch. I do want to preview the email, so I'll go ahead and generate that license. And you see here, this has popped up the standard email template. It's filled in, so it's Dear Joe Smith. We've set up a license for you with this information. And here it is. There's the product serial number assigned. Here are the details of the license. The productivity pack was on, 1 year of technical support, and so forth. And here are your standard instructions on how to install that license. So this is the product activation scenario. So all the customer needs is that product serial number is the only information they need to activate their license. And perhaps if I knew Joe, I could change this to say, Dear Joe, good to hear from you. Thank you for your order, and so on. I could customize this email as I wanted. So let me just send that email on its way. So we have, using AIM, automatically set up that license and sent email to the customer to notify them of their license so they can activate it at their convenience. So that's the standard product activation scenario. Now let's look at if we say we wanted to have, instead of activating one license, that we had an enterprise that ordered a number of licenses. So that's the enterprise user license. And in this case, remember, this is where the enterprise has a pool of licenses. Maybe they've ordered 15 or 25 or 50, whatever it might be. So it's still BigSoft. Let's say it's still that customer. You can see this screen down here now changed. We now have the information about the enterprise license pool. And in fact, this customer, BigSoft, they already have a pool set up. Let's look at that. So that's the sales pool. You see the sales pool was set up with 45 licenses. There are 38 remaining, and it was set up with these particular parameters. So if I wanted to, I can now go ahead and generate a license out of that pool, so that available count would go down to 37 and so forth. Or I could add in a new pool. So let's add in a new license pool. Let's call this manufacturing. And let's have that with a user limit of 25. And let's have a license expiration date. If we're going to make one, let's make it out. You see, out a couple of years. And a bandwidth limit, let's make that 40. And the technical support would be for 2 years. So I'm now going to go ahead and generate that license. So I'm setting up a license pool now. So in this case, the email that goes to the customer says, we've set up this license pool for you. And what it provides here is their login information to how they can log in and administer the licenses in that license pool. And here's the specification from the license pool. So we haven't issued any licenses to an individual user. We've just set up that license pool. So we'll send that email. But now we can come back here. We've got this license pool that's been set up with those 25 licenses. Now we can go ahead and, let's say, generate a license out of that pool. So I click the Generate License button. Again, I'm going to allow AIM to automatically assign a product serial number. So let's make it, in this case, let's make that a one-year license. Leave the bandwidth limit, and obviously 1 year of technical support might make more sense in that case. So we're now generating a license out of that pool. Go ahead and hit generate license. And there's the email saying, Dear Joe Smith, we've set up a license for you with this information, and there it provides with the product serial number for that one license out of the pool. So we'll send that license, close that screen. And now when we come back to here, you see that there are 24 licenses remaining out of that pool of 25. We just issued the first, called off the first license out of that pool of 25. And issuing of that license, in this case, it was done by myself logged in as a software vendor. It could have been done by the enterprise customer system administrator using those login credentials that we provided. Okay, so let's get out of that. Now, let's go back. That was product activation of single licenses or of a pool of licenses. Let's now go to where we're instead providing a license key to the end customer. So in this case, this is the scenario we're looking at here, actually, in our context, is distributed floating licensing, meaning there is an Orion server installed on the end customer's network, and we need to provide a key to them to enable the licenses in that license server. But this type of model could equally well apply to the legacy key-based system, where, again, you're providing a license key to the end customer, but in that case, generated by the legacy key system. So again, let's select a license expiration date. Let's make it, make that a year. Bandwidth limit, let's make that 55. The user count limit in this case, because it's a license for a distributed license server, let's make that 12, and let's make it 1 year of technical support. Now there's a new window, a panel that appeared down here, the license access control panel. So when you're providing a key, you're going to be generating and providing a key to your customer. As a further level of security, you can control how many times they can download that key, and what's the window they have from when you send them this email to go ahead and download that key. So you can say the key can be downloaded within 3 days, or within a week, or 3 weeks, or 2 days, or whatever it might be. So go ahead and generate that license. That all looks good. I'll send that on its way and close that. What I want to do now is show you that email as it came into that end customer. So here's the inbox. This is the refresh that. So this is the email to which the address, sorry, the email account to which all those emails were sent. So this is the last one we sent. It said we generated a license key. So here's the specification for the that license key that we set up. It is a 55 gigabyte bandwidth limit, 12 user key, and so forth. But in this case, there's a link here, and this is a custom link for this particular user. So I'm the user. I've received this email. Great, that looks like what I wanted. Okay, so I'll click on that link. It now takes me to this AIM page, and you can see here, this is where I can enter in this specific, let's put it in Dominic, just to bring something in, perhaps the node locking information or the specific name about the service name. So this is information which is required, that is to be encrypted in the key, because perhaps this license is going to be locked to these parameters and to this service and so on. But I don't need to give this information to the software vendor until this very last point where the key is now going to be generated for me on the fly. So I click download the product key, and there it is. AIM has called the key generator. It's incorporated this information into that key along with the license limits and the other information set up under this license, and they're providing it to me, so I can now go ahead and download that. There we go. I've got my license key. I can now take it off to my system. Let me go back to that. So what we showed you there was doing the AIM-based fulfillment for product activation, whether of single licenses or of an enterprise pool, and also the AIM-based license fulfillment for key-based systems, be that providing keys to redistributed Orion servers or a key for your legacy system. And the important point to note there is that you can be incorporating information about node locking parameters and so forth at that last point where the user enters it at the time they pick up their key, that you don't need to request that of them before that time. So that was what we wanted to cover. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we trust we found that helpful. And we will now take questions. So thank you for attending.